Hey guys, it is your weird creative makeup artist friend Cat Sketch to bring you another episode of Phantom Curiosities. Today we're going to talk about none other than the stories of the Radium Girls. So subscribe for more videos like this. We do 2 videos a week every Monday and Friday here on this channel, the most creative channel on YouTube, talking about really creepy stories, doing beauty makeups, body paintings, effects videos, and super interesting tales. So hit the notification bell, subscribe for more. Like I said, we're going to talk about the Radium Girls. If you haven't heard about the Radium Girls, warning, this story is going to talk about people with their skin maybe falling apart, fake blood, some teeth, stuff like that. So if you get triggered by any of these images, I am warning you now. But this story about history during the war times when women were really working in the industry is so sad but interesting. It always has piqued my interest, so we're going to talk about that today. So let's get started. As we analyze and worry over radiation seeping from Japan's earthquake damaged nuclear plants, it seems a curiosity that less than 100 years ago, many people still believed that radioactive elements were the stuff of wonders. Of course, that changed in the horrific aftermath of the nuclear bombs in the US dropped on Japan in World War II. But there were warnings beforehand, small ones, really canaries in the radioactive mines. The story found most haunting is that of the Radium Girls, the young painters of luminous watchdials in the 1920s. It remains a cautionary tale of radioactive elements, the slow recognition of their danger and risks of scientific overconfidence that rings remarkably true today. They were bones 5 years old, slightly yellowed with scraps of decayed tissue clinging to them, but a New Jersey doctor who'd ordered the skeleton excavated through. They had a lethal story to tell if he could only understand it. Because in 1928 he contacted the New York City Medical Examiner's Office to find out if they could decipher the story in these bones. What he wondered, and no one had ever asked this before, was whether those aging bones might have been radioactive. To put the question in context, one had to look back some 30 years to when scientists in France had announced a startling discovery that the rocks of the Earth's crust are not all cold, dead chunks of metal and mineral. Some were strangely alive. Some sizzled with energy and even emitted radiation. This French scientist reported the first discovery in 1896. He found that the element uranium emitted atomic particles that could pass through metal foil, creating a splatter of light spots on photographic film. His work was taken by newly married scientists Marie Curie and Pierre. And 2 years later, they reported their discovery of the two elements, both which emitted particles at a greater rate than uranium. One they named polonium, after Marie Curie's native Poland, and the second they simply named for radiation itself, calling it radium. They also proposed that elements like radium and polonium, with their particular atomic snap and sizzle, should be known as radioactive elements. It was radium, beautiful radium, as Marie called it, that seemed to embody the best, most promising of these new materials. Polonium was too intensely active. It literally burned itself away within a year. Uranium was more stable, but that was because it seemed less energized, leaking its radiation comparatively slowly. Radium, on the other hand, glowed with promise. It decayed slowly. Its half-life was 1,600 years, yet it split and sparked with a steady release of energy. The Curies had measured radium intensely at some 3,000 times that of uranium. It was rather like finding a tiny star buried in the dirt. A very tiny star. The Curies had isolated only 100 milligrams of pure radium from 3 tons of uranium ore. But that only gave it the allure of something truly rare. Within 2 years, physicians learned that the application of radium salts to a tumor would shrink the cancer. Radium therapy, it was called, introduced into hospitals shortly after the turn of the 20th century. Physicians reported what seemed to be miraculous healing effects, especially compared to therapies of the old trade. The newspapers compared radium's magic to the golden, healthful rays of the sun. Everyone wanted to stand in what seemed to be a naturally healing light. There were bottles of radium water guaranteed to make the drinker sparkle with energy. There was radium soda, radium candy, radium-laced facial creams to rejuvenate the skin, radium sprinkled face powder in 4 clearly labeled tins of white natural tan and African soaps, pain-relieving liniments and lotions. Researchers discovered that the European hot springs, famed for their healing powers, contained radon, a gas that derived from the elements uranium. Perhaps scientists suggest the health effects of mineral hot springs came from radioactive elements in the ground around them. Spas, like in upstate New York, rushed to compete by dropping uranium ores into their swimming pools. A New Jersey company grew rich selling hundreds of thousands of bottles of Radiator certified radioactive water as a tonic that guaranteed new vigor and energy. Radiant health, the ads proclaimed beautiful skin, endless vigor, and eternal health. Ingesting radium seemed the best thing to drinking sunlight. A New Jersey physician, Harrison Martlin, chief medical examiner of Essex County, had a different, less inspirational idea about radium. Of course, his first encounter with it involved a rather mysterious health crisis arising at the U.S. Radium Corporation in Orange, New Jersey. The corporation's success began with the new technological demands of the Great War. Soldiers huddled in muddy trenches of Europe learned quickly that the pocket watches they carried were totally unsuited for the battlefields. The timepiece fell out of pockets, they were crushed by the next crawling soldier, and if the watches somehow weren't smashed, they were hopelessly unreadable at night. Driven by military need, watch companies began putting watches on straps which could be safely buckled on, and began looking for a way to make watch faces glow in the dark. Luckily, German scientists had developed a self-luminous paint some years before the war. The paint glowed due to a rather neat little cascade of chemical interactions. If radium salts were mixed with zinc compounds, particles emitted by the radium caused the zinc atoms to vibrate. This vibration created a buzz of energy, as visible as a faint shiver of light. This pale greenish glow was easily outshone by daylight, but in the dark, it was just luminous enough to make an instrument readable without making it easily detectable by a watching enemy. After American troops joined the war in Europe, the factory in Orange, New Jersey, won a contract to supply radium dial instruments to the military. By the time the war ended, wristwatches with their glowing dials and handy wristbands were all the style. So were luminous face clocks. Nicely dressed up in gold and ebony for elegant homes, the corporation's business was as healthy as ever, as healthy as you might say as radium itself. There was not a thought worth mentioning that radium might not really be the golden child of the elements. At the factory, the dial painters were taught to shape their brushes to a fine point with their lips, producing the sharp tip needed to paint the tiny numbers and lines of watch dials, the lacy designs of the fashionable clocks. Each worker was expected to paint 250 dials a day. That's 5.5 days a week. They earned about $20 a week for that work, at a rate of 1.5 cents per completed dial. These painters were teenage girls and young women who became friendly during the hours together and entertained themselves during breaks by playing with the paint. They sprinkled the luminous liquid in their hair to make their curls twinkle in the dark. They brightened their fingernails with it. One girl covered her teeth with it to give herself a Cheshire cat smile when she went home at night. But none of them considered this risky behavior. Why would they when doctors were using the same material to cure people, when wealthy spa residents were paying good money to soak in this stuff, when the popular tonic Radiator was promoted by neighboring companies? No one, certainly not the dial painters themselves, saw anything to worry about this until one by one the dial painters began mysteriously falling ill. Their teeth were falling out, their mouths filled with sores, their jaws rotten. They wasted away, weakened by an apparently unstoppable anemia. By 1924, 9 of the dial painters were dead. They were all young women in their 20s, formerly healthy, with little in common except for those hours they spent sitting at their iron and work desks at the factory, painting tiny bright numbers on delicate instruments. Those bones, the ones that Harrison Martlin had sent for a radioactivity check to bring the story fully forward from those heady days of the discovery in France, those bones belonged to a dial painter from Orange, New Jersey. And that is the story of the Radium Girls. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you guys again so much for supporting this channel and this series. I really appreciate you all. Leave a comment down below on what you would love to see on another episode of Phantom Curiosities here. And I hope you stick around, subscribe for some more, and have some sweet dreams. Goodbye.